In a small, quiet village where tradition ruled every family, Aisha lived a life that was not her own. From the outside, everything seemed peaceful. Children playing in dusty streets, neighbors greeting each other with smiles. But beneath that calm surface, there was a secret no one dared to speak aloud. Aisha's family was drowning in debt, and the only way to save them was to marry her off to Hamid, her brother-in-law. The man was known for his cold, stern nature, and the thought of spending her life with him filled Aisha with a silent, growing fear. Her parents told her it was her duty, that the marriage would restore honor and settle debts, but Aisha felt as if she was being handed over like a possession. She had no say. Her dreams, her wishes, none of it mattered. Every night, she would sit by the window, watching the stars, and wondering if anyone would ever ask what she wanted. Her heart ached with loneliness, and the fear of losing herself in a life she did not choose grew heavier with each passing day. What made her pain even harder to bear was that Hamid was not just any man. He was the elder brother of Samir, a young man who had grown up alongside Aisha. Samir was different from Hamid. Where Hamid was harsh and rigid, Samir was gentle and kind. They shared a quiet friendship, often meeting in secret to talk about the future they both wished for, a future free from the chains of tradition. But their secret was dangerous. If anyone found out, the consequences would be severe. The village held tight to its rules, and breaking them meant dishonor and shame for the entire family. Still, in the depths of her heart, Aisha clung to the hope that Samir might somehow help her escape the fate forced upon her. The days counted down like a ticking clock. Invitations were sent, the wedding preparations underway, but Aisha felt trapped in a nightmare. Every smile from her family seemed forced, every glance full of expectation she couldn't meet. She wondered if anyone in the village understood how much pain a forced marriage could cause, how it could strip a person of their dignity and freedom. Samir watched her with quiet worry. He knew the wedding would change everything, but he refused to accept that Aisha's future was sealed. Alone, he planned a desperate act, a stand that could either save her or destroy both their families. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance he had. On the morning of the wedding, the village was alive with celebration. Bright fabrics decorated every corner, the scent of spices filled the air, and the sound of drums echoed through the streets. But beneath the festive noise, tension simmered. Aisha's hands trembled as she sat quietly, dressed in the heavy traditional garments, her eyes searching the crowd for a sign of hope. The ceremony began as everyone expected. Elders recited prayers, and the rituals unfolded one by one. But when it was time for Hamid to take his place, a sudden silence fell over the crowd. His chair remained empty. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some wondered if he had been delayed. Others feared something worse. Then, from the back of the room, Samir stepped forward, his gaze fixed and unwavering. He reached for Aisha's hand, and the room froze. In that moment, the weight of years of silence and fear shattered like glass. Samir's voice broke the quiet as he spoke words no one dared to say. He refused to let a tradition built on fear and obligation destroy the life of someone he cared for. The crowd stared, caught between shock and disbelief. For the first time, a challenge had been made, not just to the wedding, but to the very customs that had ruled their lives for generations. Aisha felt a flicker of hope ignite inside her chest. The man who had stood by her side, risking everything, was her only chance at freedom. But the question lingered in the air. Would their families and the village accept this bold defiance, or would they crush it before it could take root? The answers were still unknown, but one thing was clear. This wedding day would never be forgotten. Samir had always been the quiet one in the family, the brother who watched and listened more than he spoke. Unlike Hamid, whose presence commanded respect through fear, Samir was gentle, with a kindness that often went unnoticed. As children, he and Aisha had played together in the fields, sharing dreams and secrets beneath the wide open sky. Over the years, their friendship had grown into something deeper, a silent understanding that neither dared to speak aloud. Their bond was fragile, a secret thread woven between them in a world that left little room for choice. When Aisha's family was forced to accept the marriage arrangement with Hamid, Samir felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. He saw the way Aisha's eyes dimmed each time the subject was mentioned, how her spirit seemed to wither under the pressure of expectation. It was unbearable. Every night, Samir lay awake, haunted by the thought that the woman he cared for might be lost to a fate she did not choose. He knew the traditions ran deep, and challenging them could mean ruin. The village did not tolerate dissent, especially not when it threatened the family's honor. Yet, Samir couldn't stand by and watch Aisha be forced into a life of misery. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. If someone didn't stand up for her, who would? In secret, they met whenever they could. Quiet conversations under the moonlight, stolen moments behind closed doors. They spoke of hope, of a future where love could be a choice, not a burden. Samir promised Aisha that he would find a way to protect her, no matter the cost. The promise felt like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of despair. As the wedding day drew closer, the tension grew unbearable. Aisha's family busied themselves with preparations, pretending everything was normal. But Samir could see the cracks beneath their smiles, fear, uncertainty, and a deep unease about what the future might hold. Hamid, too, was growing more hostile, his anger simmering just below the surface. The man was a force of control, and no one dared cross him. Samir knew that on the wedding day, he would have to be more than a quiet observer. He had to be brave enough to speak out, to challenge the very foundation of their world. It was a dangerous gamble. If he failed, the consequences could be devastating, not just for him and Aisha, but for their entire families. But if he succeeded, they might just break free from a cycle that had trapped generations before them. The night before the wedding, Samir barely slept. He paced the small room he shared with his brother, rehearsing what he would say, how he would stand. He was terrified, but beneath the fear was a fierce resolve. This was bigger than both of them. It was about justice, about love, and about the right to choose one's own path. Morning came with a heavy sky, as if even the heavens knew the weight of what was to come. Aisha sat quietly, the heavy silk of her dress choking her, the reality of the day pressing down like a stone. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and a flicker of hope. Samir's presence was her anchor in the storm. As the village gathered for the ceremony, whispers spread through the crowd about the tension in the air. Everyone sensed that this wedding was different, that something was about to change. The elders spoke of tradition and duty, but beneath their words, a silent battle raged. When the moment arrived for Hamid to take his place, the groom's chair remained empty. The crowd held its breath. Then Samir stepped forward, taking Aisha's hand in his own. His eyes met hers, full of fierce determination. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Samir's voice rang out clear and strong, defying the weight of generations. He spoke of love, of freedom, and the right to choose one's own destiny. The village, caught between shock and disbelief, listened. Some faces twisted with anger, others softened with understanding. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Aisha felt a surge of strength flow through her. The man who had been her quiet protector was now her voice. Together, they were standing against a world that had tried to silence them both. But the path ahead was uncertain. Tradition was a powerful force, and not everyone was ready to let go. Still, in that moment, Samir and Aisha had lit a spark that could grow into a flame strong enough to change everything. The sun rose on the wedding day, casting a golden glow over the village. But inside Aisha, a storm raged. Every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat louder than the last. She sat silently, dressed in the traditional red and gold, the heavy fabric weighing down more than just her body. It crushed her spirit. Around her, the preparations buzzed with excitement, but Aisha was trapped in a world she wanted to escape. Her family tried to mask their worry with forced smiles, yet their eyes betrayed a silent fear. They knew the stakes were high. This marriage was more than just a union between two people. It was a transaction, a way to settle debts and preserve honor. But what no one spoke aloud was the price Aisha would pay: her freedom, her happiness, her very identity. Samir, standing at a distance, watched her with a fierce protectiveness. His mind raced with plans, doubts, and what-ifs. He had promised her he wouldn't let this happen, but the reality of the day tested his courage. Could he truly stand up to a tradition that had ruled their lives for generations? Could he face the wrath of a family bound by rigid rules and expectations? As the village gathered in the small courtyard decorated with vibrant flowers and colorful drapes, whispers passed between the guests. Some expressed excitement for the union. Others exchanged concerned glances. The air was thick with anticipation, but also unease. Everyone sensed something was different this time, even if they couldn't put it into words. Aisha's hands trembled as she adjusted her veil, her eyes searching for a glimpse of Samir. He caught her gaze and gave a slight nod, a silent message of hope and reassurance. She clung to that small moment like a lifeline. The ceremony began with the traditional prayers and blessings. The elders chanted solemnly, invoking the gods and ancestors to bless the couple. Aisha's heart pounded, so loud it drowned out the prayers. When it came time for Hamid to appear, the crowd's excitement turned into confusion. The groom's chair, placed prominently beside the altar, remained empty. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs grew louder. Where is Hamid? Did he come? Is this some kind of insult? The elders exchanged uneasy looks, unsure how to proceed. The silence stretched painfully, and then Samir stepped forward. Without hesitation, he took Aisha's hand in his grip firm and unwavering. The crowd fell into a stunned hush. All eyes were on them as Samir's voice rose, clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. This marriage cannot happen. Not without Aisha's consent. She deserves to choose her own life, her own path. His words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. Some faces flushed with anger, others softened with surprise. The room was split between those clinging to old ways and those quietly yearning for change. Hamid's absence was no accident. Earlier that morning, Samir confronted him, begging him to step aside and let Aisha live her life freely. Hamid's fury was fierce, but Samir's resolve was stronger. He knew the risks, anger from his family, the village gossip, even threats, but he refused to back down. Aisha felt her fear slowly melt into something stronger. With Samir by her side, she no longer felt alone. She found her voice trembling, but determined. I do not want this marriage. I want to live, to choose my own future. Her words echoed in the silent courtyard, shaking the foundation of generations-old traditions. Some of the elders whispered harshly, but others nodded slowly, the first cracks in their rigid beliefs appearing. The villagers were divided. Some shouted for the ceremony to continue. Others stood quietly, watching the unfolding drama with a new understanding. For the first time, many questioned whether forcing a marriage was truly right. Samir and Aisha stood together, united against a world that had tried to silence them. It was not an easy victory. Anger and resentment simmered beneath the surface, but it was a beginning, a chance for change. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, the wedding was called off. The village remained silent, stunned by what they had witnessed. Aisha and Samir, hand in hand, faced an uncertain future, but one filled with hope. The day had been more than a wedding. It had been a stand against injustice, a declaration that love and choice could conquer fear and tradition. And in the hearts of many, a new story had begun. The wedding hall was filled with whispers and anxious glances. The air felt thick, heavy, like the calm before a storm. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the empty groom's chair. The silence was louder than any drum or prayer that had come before. Aisha sat still, her heart pounding louder than ever. She had no idea what was about to happen next, but deep down she felt a spark, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Then, slowly, Samir stood up. He wasn't supposed to say anything, wasn't supposed to challenge the elders or disrupt the tradition. But as he stepped forward, a hush fell over the crowd. His eyes locked onto Aisha's, and without hesitation, he took her hand firmly in his own. His grip was steady, full of determination. This was no longer just a quiet rebellion between friends. This was a statement, loud, clear, impossible to ignore. Samir's voice cut through the tension, calm but unwavering. This marriage is not right. Aisha is not a prize to be claimed or a debt to be settled. She deserves a choice, just like any other human being. The words echoed across the hall, bouncing off the walls and into the hearts of everyone present. Some gasped, others murmured in shock, but no one could look away. Hamid's family members shifted uncomfortably, faces flushing with anger and confusion. To them, Samir was risking everything: his reputation, his family's honor, even his own safety. But Samir didn't falter. He had waited too long for this moment to back down now. Aisha's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were different. Tears of relief, of courage, of a quiet joy. For years, she had felt invisible, powerless. But now, with Samir standing beside her, she was seen. She was heard. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally breathe. The elders exchanged sharp glances, their voices rising in heated debate. Some demanded the ceremony continue, insisting tradition must be upheld at all costs. Others hesitated, struck by Samir's words and Aisha's bravery. The village was divided, caught between the old ways and the possibility of something new. In the crowd, a few younger villagers nodded silently, their faces bright with newfound hope. The heavy weight of expectation was beginning to crack, if only just a little. The future suddenly seemed less certain and more open. Hamid, though absent from the ceremony, was watching from afar, fury burning in his eyes. He could not believe his brother's betrayal. To him, Samir had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The family honor was shattered in a single moment, and Hamid vowed to make sure the consequences would be severe. But for Aisha and Samir, the risk was worth it. This was more than just a wedding day. It was a battle for freedom. They had stepped into the light, risking everything to claim their right to live on their own terms. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, whispers of the day's events spread through the village like wildfire. Some condemned Samir and Aisha, calling their actions shameful and reckless. Others spoke in hushed tones of admiration, inspired by their courage. That night, Aisha lay awake thinking about what had happened. The fear hadn't disappeared, it never would entirely, but it was now accompanied by something stronger: hope. Hope that one day no woman would be forced to marry against her will. Hope that love could triumph over fear and control. Samir sat beside her, quietly promising that he would stand by her no matter what came next. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and judgment. But they also knew that their stand had changed something fundamental. This wedding day was no longer just about two families. It was about a community beginning to question the rules that had held them captive for so long. And in that question lay the first seeds of change. The empty groom's chair was no longer a symbol of loss or shame. It had become a symbol of courage, a moment when one man chose to stand up not just for love, but for justice. And in doing so, he gave a voice to the voiceless. The story of that day would be told for years to come, not as a tale of defeat, but as a turning point. Aisha and Samir's defiance became a beacon, lighting the way for others who dreamed of freedom and choice. Their lives had changed forever, and so had the village. It was a beginning. The days after the wedding were tense and heavy with uncertainty. The village buzzed with gossip, and the air was thick with judgment. Some whispered angrily about the shame Samir had brought upon his family. Others spoke quietly of courage and change, though few dared say it aloud. For Aisha and Samir, life had shifted beneath their feet, and neither knew what the future held. Aisha felt the weight of eyes watching her every move. Even friends turned distant, uncomfortable with the ripple their actions had caused. She missed the quiet she once knew, the simple moments before everything spiraled. But inside, a new strength was growing. The fear hadn't disappeared, but hope was stronger now. She was no longer just a girl resigned to her fate. She was someone who had fought back. Samir visited her every day, offering quiet comfort and unwavering support. They shared whispered plans of a life where Aisha could be free to choose her path. Yet, they knew it would not be easy. Hamid's fury had only deepened. The man was not one to forgive or forget. Threats began to surface, veiled warnings from family elders and harsh words from villagers who saw Samir's defiance as betrayal. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Samir received a chilling message. Hamid's men were preparing to confront him. The warnings had escalated from words to actions. Samir's family began to fracture, old loyalties tested by his stand. His parents pleaded with him to back down, fearful for their family's honor and safety. But Samir's resolve only hardened. He would not let fear dictate their lives. Aisha, too, was caught in the crossfire. Her family, torn between tradition and their love for her, struggled to find balance. Some relatives urged her to comply and accept the marriage to avoid shame, while others quietly supported her courage. The village became a battlefield of opinions, each side digging in their heels. Despite the threats and isolation, Aisha and Samir found solace in their shared dreams. They talked of leaving the village, starting anew somewhere distant, where no one knew their names or stories. The idea of escape glimmered like a distant star, bright but far away. One evening, as they sat beneath the same stars where they once whispered secrets as children, Aisha looked at Samir with tears in her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, "but I'm more scared of living a life that isn't mine." Samir took her hand, his voice steady. "We'll face whatever comes together. I promise." The community's reaction grew more intense. Some villagers, bound by rigid tradition, began to isolate Aisha's family. Business relationships faltered, neighbors avoided them, and whispers of curses and dishonor spread. It was a lonely existence, but their courage inspired a quiet resistance among the youth and a few brave elders who longed for change. In the midst of this turmoil, a local woman named Fatima stepped forward. She was known for her wisdom and had long been a respected voice in the village. Fatima quietly visited Aisha and Samir, offering advice and support. She spoke about the importance of standing up for what is right and reminded them that change often begins with the smallest acts of bravery. With Fatima's encouragement, Aisha and Samir found new strength. They began speaking to other families, sharing their story, and opening conversations about choice and freedom. Slowly, small pockets of understanding grew. Not everyone agreed, but seeds of hope were planted. One afternoon, news came that Hamid had taken legal action, claiming the marriage was binding and demanding it proceed. The case stirred the village, forcing everyone to confront the consequences of the old ways. The courtroom became a battleground for justice, where voices long silenced finally spoke. As the trial unfolded, Aisha stood tall, recounting her story with clarity and courage. She spoke of her fear, her pain, and her right to choose her future. Her words resonated deeply, touching the hearts of many who had once remained silent. The verdict was a victory not just for Aisha, but for the idea that no one should be forced into a life they do not want. The court's decision sent ripples through the village and beyond, challenging the old traditions and sparking wider conversations. Though the journey was far from over, that moment marked a turning point. Aisha and Samir's courage had opened a door, showing that even the strongest traditions could be questioned, and that freedom was worth fighting for. Their story became a beacon, a reminder that change begins with one voice, one act of bravery, one heart refusing to be silenced. The village would never be the same, and neither would they. Together, they faced an uncertain future, but for the first time, it was a future of their own choosing. The courtroom was tense, filled with faces from the village, some curious, others hostile. Aisha stood before the judge, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. For the first time, she told her truth in public. She spoke of the fear that had haunted her for years, the pain of being treated like property, and the desperate hope that she could live a life of her own choosing. Samir stood by her side, silent but unwavering. His presence was a shield, a symbol of the defiance that had brought them here. The elders, who had once demanded obedience, sat uneasily, forced to confront a reality they had long ignored. The judge listened intently, the weight of the tradition-heavy village pressing on the room. Hamid's lawyers argued fiercely, insisting the marriage was a binding agreement, a sacred duty that must be fulfilled. They spoke of honor and family reputation, trying to paint Aisha's refusal as betrayal. But Aisha's words cut through the arguments like a beacon. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every woman who had ever been silenced. Outside the courtroom, the village was divided. Some whispered in support, inspired by Aisha's bravery. Others fumed in anger, feeling their values challenged. The case had become more than a legal battle. It was a clash of old and new, a test of whether tradition would bend to the winds of change. In the quiet moments between hearings, Aisha and Samir found strength in each other. They spoke of the future, one where choice and love could exist without fear. Yet, the threats from Hamid's side grew darker. Menacing notes arrived, warnings whispered in the night. The couple's resolve was tested, but they refused to back down. One evening, Fatima came to visit, her face lined with wisdom and worry. "This fight is bigger than just you two," she said softly. "You are lighting a fire that will burn away centuries of silence. But you must be strong. The road ahead will not be easy." Her words lingered with them as the trial reached its climax. The judge's decision was announced on a crisp morning. The room fell silent as the verdict was read. The court recognized Aisha's right to refuse the marriage. It was a landmark ruling, one that challenged the foundations of the village's customs. Cheers erupted from supporters, while others stood in stunned silence. For Aisha and Samir, it was a victory born of courage and love. But it was also a beginning, a call for change that would take time to fully take root. Back in the village, the aftermath was complex. Some families quietly celebrated, feeling a shift in the air. Others held tighter to tradition, fearful of losing control. Yet, the whispers of change had grown louder. Conversations once forbidden now began to unfold in homes and marketplaces. Aisha returned to her family's home, not as a defeated bride, but as a symbol of hope. Her parents' faces were a mix of pride and sorrow. Their daughter had challenged the very world that had tried to bind her. Slowly, they began to see her not as a burden, but as a beacon of strength. Samir's family was less welcoming. Hamid's anger had not faded, and the rift between brothers widened. But Samir stood firm, knowing that standing by Aisha was the right path, no matter the cost. Together, Aisha and Samir started reaching out beyond their village. They spoke at gatherings, shared their story with others trapped by similar traditions. Their message was clear: no one should be forced into a life against their will. The fight for freedom and dignity was a universal one. With Fatima's help, they organized meetings with local leaders and activists. Slowly, a network formed, a community of people ready to challenge outdated customs and support those seeking change. Though the journey was far from over, Aisha and Samir had become pioneers. Their courage had broken a silence that had lasted generations, and their love had proven stronger than fear and oppression. As the seasons changed, the village began to transform. New voices rose, laws were questioned, and the idea that choice mattered took hold. It was a slow, sometimes painful process, but it was progress. For Aisha, each day was a step toward freedom, not just her own, but for countless others who would come after her. The shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer controlled her. With Samir beside her, she looked ahead, ready to face whatever challenges came next. Together, they had rewritten the story, a story of courage, love, and the unbreakable human spirit. The village was still buzzing with the echoes of the court's verdict. Change was in the air, but so was unrest. Some families quietly praised Aisha's bravery, while others tightened their grip on tradition, unwilling to let go. The divide was deeper than anyone had anticipated. For Aisha and Samir, life had become a tightrope walk between hope and danger. Despite the victory, threats did not cease. One night, as the moon hung low and silver, a group of men gathered near Samir's home, voices harsh and angry. They demanded he stop this rebellion, warned him of consequences he couldn't yet see. Samir's family, caught between fear and loyalty, struggled to protect him, but their protection was fragile. Aisha, aware of the growing danger, stayed close to Samir, their bond strengthening with every challenge. They knew their fight was bigger than themselves. It was for every young girl and woman trapped by silence and fear. But the weight of that responsibility often felt unbearable. Meanwhile, the village's youth began to stir. Inspired by Aisha and Samir's courage, some started questioning the age-old customs that had dictated their lives. Secret meetings were held under the cover of darkness, where dreams of freedom were whispered. A new generation dared to imagine a world where choice mattered. One of these young voices was Zara, a schoolteacher who had long been frustrated by the strict rules governing women's lives. She approached Aisha with a quiet determination. "Your courage has opened a door," she said softly. "Let's help more women find their voices." Together, Aisha, Samir, and Zara began organizing workshops on rights and education. They spoke with mothers, daughters, and even some fathers willing to listen. Progress was slow and resistance fierce, but small victories kept their hope alive. Hamid's anger, however, remained a dark cloud. His bitterness turned into public accusations, trying to shame Aisha and Samir. He spread rumors, hoping to isolate them and regain control. Yet, the couple's resolve only grew stronger. They refused to be silenced or broken. One evening, as the village celebrated a traditional festival, a sudden storm swept through. The wind tore at decorations, and rain flooded the streets. Yet inside a small community hall, the new movement gathered, undeterred by the tempest outside. Aisha stood before the group, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This storm is nothing compared to the one inside us," she said. "We are here because we believe in change. We believe in a future where no one is forced to marry or live a life they do not choose." Her words resonated deeply. Faces once skeptical now showed glimmers of hope. The community was beginning to understand that honoring tradition didn't mean sacrificing humanity. With every meeting, more voices joined their cause. Parents started to reconsider long-held beliefs. Young men like Samir became role models for respect and support. Slowly, the village's rigid walls began to crumble. But progress brought new challenges. Old power structures resisted, some elders openly opposing the movement. Tensions escalated, sometimes erupting into heated confrontations. The fight for freedom was proving to be as complex as it was necessary. Aisha often found herself exhausted but determined. She knew this was a marathon, not a sprint. Change would not come overnight, but with every story shared, every life touched, they were moving forward. One afternoon, as she walked through the village, Aisha noticed small but powerful signs. A mother encouraging her daughter to stay in school, a father speaking against child marriage, young women smiling with newfound confidence. These moments were small victories, proof that their stand had sparked a shift. Samir watched her with pride, knowing their journey was far from easy, but worth every hardship. "We've started something no one can stop," he said quietly. And he was right. The story of Aisha and Samir had become more than just theirs. It had become a movement, a spark igniting change in hearts and minds. The empty groom's chair was no longer a symbol of shame, but of courage, resistance, and hope. Together, they faced the future, uncertain, challenging, but alive with possibility. Their village was waking up, and nothing would ever be the same again. The village had changed in ways no one could have imagined just months before. The story of Aisha and Samir had rippled far beyond their small community, inspiring others to question traditions once accepted without thought. The walls of silence and fear were crumbling brick by brick. Yet, the road ahead was still filled with obstacles, both seen and unseen. One morning, Aisha stood by the river that ran through the village, watching the water flow freely. It reminded her of the journey she had taken, the twists, turns, and moments where she almost gave up. But like the river, she kept moving forward. Samir joined her, his hand finding hers without a word. Together, they had faced anger, rejection, and threats, but also hope, support, and love. Their fight had sparked a broader movement. Nearby villages began hearing their story, some quietly supporting, others openly challenging old customs. Women who had been hidden behind closed doors started to speak up. Men began to understand that true honor came from protecting choice, not enforcing control. In the village square, a new tradition was taking shape. Instead of weddings forced upon unwilling brides, celebrations began to honor consent, respect, and partnership. Parents who once pressured their daughters to marry for convenience now listened to their dreams and desires. Hamid's fury had not faded, but his power was waning. The community no longer supported his rigid demands. His threats lost their weight, drowned out by voices calling for change. Even some of his closest allies started to question his harsh ways. One afternoon, a gathering was held under the old banyan tree, a place where villagers had met for generations to discuss important matters. This time, the topic was different. The village leaders, young and old, came together to talk about new laws to protect women's rights and ensure marriages were based on choice. Aisha and Samir sat among them, no longer just rebels, but respected voices. The air was filled with a cautious optimism. The fight had been long, but the future looked brighter. Fatima smiled as she watched the conversation unfold. Her years of quiet support had blossomed into a movement that was unstoppable. "This is only the beginning," she said softly to Aisha. "You have given your village a gift that no one can take away." Aisha felt the weight of those words, but also the warmth of accomplishment. She knew that the journey toward true freedom would be ongoing, but she no longer faced it alone. The voices of many had joined hers, creating a chorus too strong to silence. As the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the village, Aisha and Samir walked hand in hand through the streets. Children played freely, their laughter a melody of hope. Women walked with confidence, their heads held high. The old fears were still there, but now they were overshadowed by something stronger: courage. That night, as they sat beneath the stars, Aisha whispered, "We did it. We really did it." Samir squeezed her hand gently. "This is just the start. There's so much more to do, but we will face it together." Their story had become a beacon, a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage could change the world. The empty groom's chair was no longer a symbol of loss or shame. It stood for the power of standing up, for the fight for dignity and choice. In the years that followed, the village transformed further. Education flourished, voices grew louder, and traditions evolved to respect the rights of every individual. Aisha and Samir's names became synonymous with hope and change. And though the road had been hard, filled with pain and uncertainty, they knew it was worth every moment. For in standing together, they had rewritten not just their own story, but the story of their entire community. Their love, their courage, and their unyielding spirit had sparked a revolution of hearts. The village would never be the same again.